is that sometimes when you feel empty, that you actually have to just empty yourself a little further to be filled all the way back up. Because I didn't have work, straight up, like wasn't getting any. And instead of figuring out how to white knuckle my way through COVID, I decided to start giving away. The greatest way to feel fulfilled, to feel a sense of purpose and meaning, is to give generously, regardless of where you stand financially, regardless of where you stand from a resource standpoint, because abundance is not an outcome of what you have. Abundance is an outcome of who you are.
On today's episode of Frame by Frame, we have my good friend, filmmaker, and mezcal enthusiast, Jake Viramontez. Bro, welcome to Frame by Frame, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you. I'm glad you incorporated the mezcal enthusiast.
I want to talk about your filmmaking journey. You're one of the most inspiring filmmakers that I've met, both from the artistry and type of work you do, and then the type of work that you do with intention.
So let me start by saying that this year I'll be giving away 4 films for free to 4 different nonprofits anywhere in the world for any cause. And I say free of charge, I mean free. I'll cover the cost of the flights and the lodging and the food. I'll be doing my own fundraising to take care of my hard costs. I want you, the nonprofit, to be able to utilize my filmmaking so that way you can continue doing what you're doing in the world. So after I launched this idea of giving away films for free to NGOs, at this exact same time that I was looking at nonprofit organizations' applications coming through, Sony had just released their brand new FX3, which has in a lot of ways revolutionized documentary filmmaking. And that's a go-to camera for anybody that's going to be traveling and making a cinematic image. And so I reached out to the director of marketing North America and I said, I'm making these films for free and I'm trying to make a difference and I'm doing it at the highest caliber and I want to do it on the best camera in the market. And you just released that. Would you send me the FX3 for free so I can go and make these films? And he wrote me back and he said, this is awesome. Send me your shipping address.
No way.
And they shipped me a prototype. It wasn't even in production yet. And they were like, you're going to have to give this back because this is not even like for consumers to use. So I took that camera and I made the first film down in Los Angeles for an organization called Our Own. And I shot it and I cut it and I gave it to the nonprofit. And I also sent it to Sony. And I said, hey, this is what I made. Thank you guys for supporting me. Look at what we were able to produce for this organization with your support. And they got back to me and they said, we're showing your film this afternoon to the president of Sony because we think that it's so impactful. And I said, okay, like, that's awesome. Like, I just was saying, thank you. And when they got back to me, they said, your film has sort of got our wheels turning. Let's connect. So I got on a Zoom call with them and they said, we've been trying to figure out how to do something like this and haven't been able to sort of crack the code. And you've sort of pierced the veil here. They're like, we want to create a campaign. That's one of Sony's flagship campaigns alongside their alpha female, campaign, alongside their Sony Alpha campaign. And they were like, we want to create what's now called Create Action, which Sony gives $50,000 in cash and $50,000 in Sony gear to nonprofits around the United States. And each one of those nonprofits gets a custom film made about their organization. And they're like, we want you to direct and shoot and edit all of those films for these NGOs. And we want to pay you as a commercial director. So I went from having no commercial work during COVID to kind of coming out of COVID right at the very tail end, landing what I would consider a dream client, producing dream work. And so there's something that we should pause and just notice here. Is that sometimes when you feel empty, that you actually have to just empty yourself a little further to be filled all the way back up. Because I didn't have work, straight up, like wasn't getting any. And instead of figuring out how to white knuckle my way through COVID, I decided to start giving away. And you think that you should start giving away once you have a lot, once you have an abundance of something that you don't need anymore, something that you would sell at a yard sale, or something that you would give to a friend because it's taking up room on your shelf or whatever it might be, or you don't have use for it anymore. But the truth of life that I've experienced today since I began this whole journey is that when you give away your gifts and your talents, mine are film, but whoever's listening, it might not be, it might be something else. For you, it's film. That when you give away your gifts and your talents, you actually engage in the most important cosmic exchange. Call it divine, call it spiritual, call it the unseen, whatever you want to fill in the blank of what dimension is outside of our sight, sound, and sense. That is the exchange platform that you really should be focusing on. Forget Bitcoin, forget all these digital coins. I mean, whatever, do your due diligence, invest where you want. But when you really are thinking about what is the investment that I'm making in my life as a human being, the greatest way to feel fulfilled, to feel a sense of purpose and meaning, is to give generously, regardless of where you stand financially, regardless of where you stand from a resource standpoint, because abundance is not an outcome of what you have. Abundance is an outcome of who you are. And you create what you are going to live into. So if you're creating from a place of abundance, guess what? Abundance is going to find you. I ended up on Kelly Clarkson.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Because a producer found an article that was written in my local newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
I've been invited to make 25 films for Sony. I've been brought into, I got invited to give a TEDx talk. There's no way that I can explain with logical reasoning why I've entered into the community, the experiences, and the opportunities that I have since I launched this, other than to say that when you act generously, when you act abundantly, you live into a more abundant reality.
That's so good.
If people hear nothing else, they should hear the underpinnings of what makes all this work go, because they could turn this on tomorrow in their life. This shouldn't just be a conversation where they hear about this interesting filmmaker that Daniel knew from going to Toronto with. They should hear a story about themselves, because this is not a story about Jake. This is a story about what are we all doing collectively in our own individual pockets of the world to try and invest into other people who can never say thank you and can never repay you. So that way you can sit back and watch as the world responds to that action in a magnificent return. That the ROI on that kind of investment is not even quantifiable.
Right.
It's not 10x, it's not 100x, it's infinite.
Which your example is just proof of that, of like you said, you literally you paid your own way. You did this with no promise of all that happened. So I think, everything you just said, if you're listening to this, I think you should rewind it and go re-listen to it again, because it's so good. And
fill in the blank of how your story is the hero story that we're talking about, that you are the activator of your future, that tomorrow your story is dependent on what you decide it's going to depend upon. Is it going to be a reiteration of your past, of all the stories that you've told yourself about not having enough or not being enough or not being talented enough or not having enough resource or being dealt the short end of the stick? What's the story that you need to deprogram so that way tomorrow you can wake up and say, not only am I enough, but I have more than enough. And from that place of overflow, and you have to believe it. I straight up had no money in the bank with a kid on the way. I had plenty of excuses, and call it foolishness or call it, young, dumb, vigor. I did it, and I can look back and I can speak on the past with clarity.
Trying to pick out what gear to use as a content creator, filmmaker can be overwhelming. So I put together a Google sheet that I will update frequently with gear that I've either used or can recommend. We'd love for you to have that resource. Make sure you click on the link below. Save time, save money, shoot better. Now let's get back to the show. like many of us, you got into filmmaking a little bit younger, and if I'm not mistaken, had some mentors that were pretty influential in your journey.
Yeah, I think that's probably the thing that sets apart someone who decides they want to pursue something for the rest of their life and somebody who decides that they want to take a class as an elective, is that person or that mentor, that teacher that facilitates the unlocking of the aha moment of, whoa, this can be something really fun and something that I can actually make a living doing, which is rare to be able to merge those two worlds together. I can enjoy myself and I can get paid to do it. And not many people get to say that, right, in their profession. I remember I was in high school and I specifically took a film class because a buddy of mine told me that it was going to be an easy A. And so I was not a school guy at all. That was not my focus. You know, there's sort of these critical moments that you have throughout your life that you'll never forget. And I remember when I ingested the VHS footage, or it was the mini DV footage, into my computer, into iMovie, and I cut two scenes together that continued, that looked sort of seamless. And it was like this man discovering fire moment where it was just like, we have unlocked a new dimension. And so for me, that was filming and editing. And the more I did it and the more I got into documentaries, the more I realized that that was a path that I really wanted to pursue. And so I did have a mentor. My high school film teacher, his name is Terry McElhatton, really, really incredible guy who's since passed. And he sat down with me after my first documentary that I filmed, which was on my dad, who's a retired firefighter. Spent 2 days at the firehouse with them, captured a bunch of footage. And when I came back, that teacher sat with me and really walked me through the process of what does it look like to craft a narrative in the edit, which, as we know, is where things get made or broken all the time. That an edit is essentially writing at the last stage of the process. And I've seen so many projects falter, and I've also seen so many projects thrive because of the post process and the storytelling that's done in that stage. And so when he taught me about editing, and I brought that whole film together and submitted it to a festival where it ended up winning a few awards, that was when it clicked. Okay, not only did I have a ton of fun doing this, but this is something that people will pay you to do in the future. And that was what really set me on my journey.
And then from there, did you immediately go to LA and get your name in the mix? What was that kind of next step process for you like?
No, I did not. What happened was much more humbling. So I finished high school, and at that point I had started working with a nonprofit that sent doctors and nurses around the world, particularly to West Africa in the middle of the Ivorian Civil War. And so at 17, I was getting a UN escort into West Africa and making what most would consider an insane project at that age. For me, it felt like the most natural thing I could be producing because I loved adventure. I loved a healthy dose of mischief. I liked doing things that I wasn't really supposed to be doing. And that certainly felt like it ticked all those boxes. And so I went out there and I made that film. And when I came back, they asked me if I wanted to continue being their media producer, this nonprofit. And so I traveled with them to Morocco and Tajikistan, all while I was still in high school. And so I had sort of discovered that I love traveling, I love image making, and I love meeting people from other cultures. And I love expanding myself and my comfort zone that I know, right? The best way to expand your comfort zone is to go into the unknown.
That's a good one.
To press up against the space of your limits of what you were born into, the culture that you were handed, the food, the language, the idioms, all of the things that you become so accustomed with. The best way to grow and to create new neural pathways and to create new synapse firings and new networks, frankly, in your brain system and in your body is to go and put yourself in an unknown dimension. And that's what traveling was for me at a young age. And I was doing it with a purpose. I was doing it with a camera. There's a reason for it. It was different than just going on vacation. It was to go capture something that was hopefully going to have a resonant and relevant impact on people who watched it. And so when I came home from all of those trips, I was graduating and I thought, I'm going to either USC, UCLA, or NYU. It is, if I don't go to one of those three, it's a bust. Life's over, right? I mean, that's sometimes how it feels when you're young and trying to figure out the next step. And the story that you're given is that after high school, you go to college, and after college, you get a job, and after a job, you have a family, and after a family, you have, you know, there's a script that we've sort of been handed for good reason. There's a lot of beautiful things in that unfolding of that process. I had a bad GPA. And once I discovered that I wanted to go to film school, I started working really hard on my academics, and I got good grades right before I graduated. The problem was the cumulative GPA was not, that's it. It was too little, too late. And so I applied to those three schools that I mentioned, and I got rejected by all three of them. And I remember someone asked me not too long ago, they said, what is the most important thing that you would say to your younger self if you could go back and have a pep talk with that younger version of yourself? And what I said then, and what I would still say now, is become accustomed to rejection. You might call it failure, but in this context, I think of it as rejection. Make a emotional relationship with rejection, because this is not the first time, and it's certainly not the last time. In the arts and in a creative process, we're constantly putting things out that we're attempting to have others receive and hopefully resonate with. But that doesn't always happen. And it's also incredibly subjective. And so I could paint this entire room with rejection letters from film festivals or film schools or grant applications, you name it, fill in the blank, right? Of times that I've been told no. And unfortunately, our brains are wired from a survival standpoint to fixate on these things that we failed at, because we're trying not to replicate them. So that way we can propagate our species. But the fact of the matter is those are not the things that should define you. The things that should define you are the ways that you respond after that happens. And you get rejected, and then what? So to answer your question of did I go down to Los Angeles right after high school? No. I got rejected, and with my tail between my legs, I stayed at home and lived with my parents for another year and a half, and I went to community college. I ended up getting those prerequisites done, and when I decided to move to LA, I didn't move to Los Angeles with the prerequisite of I'm going to go and go to film school. I actually was kind of jaded and a little bit on the...
Which makes sense.
Angry side a bit of just being like, I can't believe they didn't even, okay, let me just tell you a little anecdote. I drove down to USC from San Jose, California. I bought a portable DVD player. Remember those?
Yep.
That you take traveling with you. And I cut a DVD of all of my work, my reel, right? I made on iDVD or whatever, I made like an intro menu that was super cool. And I had all my pieces on it. It was set to the soundtrack of Jason Bourne. I still remember all of this. And I went down there and I knocked on doors until I got to the admissions office. And I said, you need to watch my reel because you're not going to accept me based off of my GPA. And they said, we don't look at anybody's portfolio.
Wow.
We just don't. That's not how we decide. And so we are not going to look at it. And I remember I was with my dad, me and my dad, like we're kind of pulling off this little heist. And he could obviously see how visibly bummed I was, but it's like, man, that's not actually how life works. Like that's another thing I would tell myself. It's like life works in the way that I thought it was gonna work in that scenario where you hustle, you find different avenues, because I thought they were accepting filmmakers. I have nothing against USC. Let me just preface that. This was my experience. Right. Their criteria was academically based, and they were intending on developing filmmakers. And so when I moved down to LA, I said, I'm just gonna start working. And I went on Craigslist and I said, I'm just going to find a job. And I saw a posting of someone who said, I need a filmmaker to travel with me from Los Angeles to the Panama Canal taking public transportation.
Wow.
No itinerary, no reservations anywhere. and I need you to film this journey of us trying to pull this off. So I wrote him back, and long story short, I ended up going for 2 months. And I consider that experience the closest thing that I could have had to a rite of passage in my life as a young man. Culturally, we don't have rites of passages. That's something that I think we've lost in our Western and particularly American world. I can't really speak to European experiences of, adolescence to adulthood, but I know for us, we don't really have designated rites of passage the way that we have for centuries, where we would have a very marked transition from you were a boy, and then now this critical psychological, physiological, transformative moment happens, and then you become a man, and now you're part of the men of this community. And so I wasn't even really seeking that out. It just sort of happened. And there was something about traveling into the wild, and you want to talk about into the unknown, getting on a Greyhound bus in Los Angeles and walking across the border in Tijuana and figuring it out from there all the way down to the Panama Canal, having our life threatened by a drug dealer in Belize and almost getting into car accidents and you name it, and emerging on the other side, a version of myself that I was really proud of and really excited to embody. And so
it's like a real life hero's journey.
Yeah. And I think we're seeking that. I think it's been hardwired in our DNA for so long to, if you have that voice within you that says, I want to go beyond, I want to do more, I want to experience the fullness that this life has to offer me, that if that voice is present within you, that you have to seek it out. And that does become your individual hero's journey. And in my circumstance with Mexico and Central America, it really did take me out of my known world, take me through trials, take me through setbacks and have to overcome them and learn things about what it means to be resilient and to persevere in the midst of tiredness and fatigue, to get to the end and realize you have it within you. You're capable. You can do this if you just continue. And so to round all that out to your original question, I spent so many hours on buses when I was on that trip, just staring out the window. And I decided that I wanted to go to film school when I got home. And so when I got back to Los Angeles after that trip, I applied to the Art Center in Pasadena. And they specifically wanted to look at my reel, ironically. And they didn't really care about my academics all that much. And I got admitted to the very next round of students that were being accepted because they had an ongoing acceptance. They had trimesters. And so there was a new cohort every single trimester. And so I got accepted and I went through the Art Center and got my my BFA in film production.
And then from there, you go right into kind of the commercial directing.
Well, the goal after that is
rat race.
The goal after that is go make money, right? You're out of college, like time to face the music of rent and living expenses. And so I got into commercial work at the tail end of my time at the Art Center, and I started looking to get represented by agencies and production companies. And slowly but surely, I started building up a portfolio and a reel, and I was sort of known as this filmmaker that erred on the side of humanity. I think a lot of my younger experiences had softened my spirit towards compassion because I had seen people living in pretty dire circumstances, having gone to the front lines of a war zone and seeing how it affects people from a tribal perspective and then on an individual perspective, and then having, explored deep into traumas of other people through the documentaries that I had done with this nonprofit. I think it just sort of naturally broke my spirit apart to where like the light shined through my work a little bit more. That's sort of what part of it's genetic makeup of maybe I'm prone to that, but I think part of it is life experience that pulls it out of you as well, that you get softened by the experiences that you have or hardened, depending on what direction you go. And so I became this sort of like humanitarian commercial filmmaker. And so I started getting hired by, Chevrolet to go do stories about this new soccer ball that they had created for villages around the world, because soccer balls get absolutely torn up in the village. And so they made this sort of indestructible soccer ball. And I went and I did some stories in South America and in Africa about this ball and it's the power of play in communities, and doing stories about girls' empowerment through sports, because Chevrolet was the main sponsor for Manchester United at the time. And so they're doing a lot of soccer content. And, just getting tapped to do these stories that would cause the audience to feel something. And it's proven to be a very positive tool in my toolkit, because brands over the years have realized how important it is to be human, and how people don't want to be sold a product. They want to be handed an emotion or an emotional experience. And the best way to do that is to talk about a person who went through a process to get to a place that changed them. And if you can capture that in a way that doesn't feel stilted or
inauthentic,
if it feels authentic, then that's hard for brands to be able to pull off. So finding filmmakers who can do that was a big plus for me, kind of in the marketplace as a director.
And then
I did that for years. I did that for probably 9 years out of college.
Wow. And then was there a specific moment where you're like, there has to be more? I don't know if this is the road I want to go down, because I was kind of introduced to you as you were starting Sown, but I am curious about like the backstory and how you arrived to that place.
Well, I had been working as this sort of traveling commercial director up until COVID. And when COVID happened and planes got grounded and face-to-face contact ceased to exist, I sort of didn't have a market. I was just like, because I was a traveling filmmaker who did stories about people. And I was stuck at home not doing that. And so I had a lot of time to sort of soul search of where I was at. And when I looked at what I was setting out to do as a filmmaker coming out of college, it was make money as a commercial director. I had achieved that goal and was doing that thing when COVID hit. And so when I stopped to think about it, I started to ask myself, why is it that I don't feel content or satisfied in the role that I'm in? And I had a breaking point with a client that I got during COVID, who it was a major network, and we were working on a show, and what they were asking me to create and produce. And bear in mind, I hadn't been making very much money during COVID. So I was kind of taking whatever I could get. I was working with this network and working with one of their producers, and they were asking me to essentially create a show that was really denigrating other people and who they were. And it's just like kind of sloppy reality stuff. And I was like, you know what? I quit. This is in the middle of it. I was like, you guys can keep the other half of the budget that you were supposed to pay me. I need to get out. And after I quit, I asked myself, okay, this is clearly not the mountain that you want to be scaling. You've been climbing it for a while, and here you are with a pretty good view. Is this really the summit that you're looking to put your flag on? And so I decided that what I really missed and what I really wanted was to be back where I started. I wanted to be back in communities, working with NGOs that were making an impact in transforming people's lives and helping leave a lasting impact with the work that they were doing, and not just creating this media cycle that sort of had no relevance and was swallowed up by the time it was, before you could even finish chewing it, it was already spit out and a new piece of content was in your way. And so I thought, I'm going to give away films for free to organizations who can't afford it. And I'm just going to come out of pocket. I'm just going to pay for it. myself. And so I talked to my wife and I sat down with her and I said, we were 4 months pregnant at this point. And so we had a baby on the way, a whole nother human to take care of. And I said, I really think that I need to do this from a soul perspective because something is sorely, sorely missing in my work. And so she supported me in that. She was like, I could tell that this means something to you. We'll figure it out, right? Well, let's do it. Like you go do it. And so I went and I put a camera up in my backyard and made a video and posted on social media and said, if you're an organization that needs your story told, I'm going to do it. I'll fly to you. I'll come to you. I'll give you a story. I'll shoot it. I'll cut it and I'll hand you something and you won't spend a penny. And it was sort of like a windfall event where hundreds of nonprofits started to reach out and say, we need this. And so I began what turned into my nonprofit, which is now called Sown.
Sown for Good, yes. And we, which was really cool, got to work together on a project for that last year with the passport program. What was that kind of growth period of like setting up your camera in the backyard to then putting together that amazing program that we got to take a part of?
Sony got involved. They invited me to make all these films. And so, like I said, I've made 25 films to this point on behalf of Sony. Each one of those organizations that has been selected has an emphasis mostly on youth. And a lot of the NGOs, they're all domestic. They're all in the United States. And so a lot of these organizations are located in underfunded parts of the city. Regions where kids who live in those neighborhoods and in those zip codes don't often get afforded the opportunity to leave or to go explore something outside of the story that has been written for them. So I'm meeting these kids along the way, right? Chicago, Philly, New York, Oakland, and they're all saying, hey, I want to travel. I want to be a filmmaker. I want to make documentaries. Why don't you hire me? Why don't you bring me on as an assistant or something? And I was like, absolutely not. That sounds like a liability. I don't hire people. I'm a one-man band. I'm like, I shoot from the hip. I'm a bad boss. I don't know. Exactly. I don't know how to teach. I don't know how to be the person that you want me to be. I'm sorry. But I would always give them my email or my cell and be like, I'm a phone call away. I can riff with you all day long, but I'm not going to promise you some big structured future. That's just something I was probably internally afraid of. And so not wanting to have their future in my lap. But I got enough requests from kids that I was meeting around the country that asked for that exact thing that I decided I would create a program. I thought, all right, well, I'm not going to hire any of these kids on right now. I have since subsequently brought them on for gigs, to pay them to do projects. But I decided that I would create the passport program where, like I said, a lot of them had never gone out of their neighborhood or had never been afforded the opportunity to travel and explore. So I said, I'm going to select 5 young folks from around the country who are aspiring documentary filmmakers. I'm going to help them get their passport. I'm going to get them a camera, which I got Sony to donate 5 cameras to each one of them. I'm going to get them lenses, gear, steady cams, the whole kit and caboodle, lens filters, a camera bag. And we're going to fly to Rwanda and we're going to make a documentary about a nonprofit. And I'm going to teach them in real time how to do it because I know how to do it. And so if they're there with me, then they'll learn if they're paying attention. And so I selected two kids from Philly, one from New York, one from Chicago, and one from Oakland. And we decided that on the way to Rwanda, we would stop in Toronto and spend one day to learn from Mark Bone, who teaches the art of documentary. He's a very talented filmmaker himself, but teaches within his program called the Art of Documentary. So I got all the kids access for free to this course online, Art of Documentary. And then we did a one-day boot camp with Mark and Mike, which is where me and you got to meet up and you shot some behind the scenes while we were there.
Yes. And it was just such a cool experience to, I was being in the industry quite a bit, myself, to see just kind of the wonder and exploring and just having that kind of like fresh new perspective was like just so inspiring with all the kids involved. And if you want to see the film from the Passport program, I'll put all the links in the description below. And also, I know now, speaking of art of documentary, I'm a part of the community now. You've now opened up Sown to take on other filmmakers to make films for nonprofits, right? Talk to me about that.
Well, I reached out. So Art of Documentary has this online program, and they're doing an incredible job teaching emerging documentary filmmakers how to have a cinematic eye, how to search for story, how to uncover story, how to craft something that's memorable to an audience, and really is all of the core tenets of what I do when I'm making a film. And so when I saw their work and I started seeing some of the talent that was coming out of their program, and I had already started receiving filmmaker applications, which we should talk about next, I started getting filmmaker applications from students within Art of Documentary, and they tended to have some of the best work. And so I reached back out to Mark and I said, why don't we create a more structured pathway for the students who really excel within Art of Documentary, where we invite them that if they would like, they could go on an assignment as a part of Sown to make a story for an NGO. And then we cover all the costs of the flight, the food, the transportation, the interpreters, all of the things that come along with making an international film, and give to these filmmakers what I had when I was younger, which was traveling to experience the world through the eyes of somebody else and making something that would have a lasting impact. And so we started that last year. And so we've sent 3 Art of Documentary filmmakers out on assignment so far, and we're going to continue this year to select those that emerge out of the program as they have a one-day documentary competition, and we've been using that as sort of our proving ground of who are the filmmakers that we'll keep an eye on and reach out to and make an offer to send them out. And they have to know going into it, this is not a payday. What we're doing here is not a payday. And if that's what you need and are looking for in your career, I get it. I've been there. I've been in that state where I just can't take on free work. There's too many things I need to save up for, or goals that I have financially that I need to meet, where I can't speculate with my time. But if you're in a place where part of the overall well-being is not just financial, but it's spiritual and it's meaningful, I wanted Sown to be this resource for filmmakers that they could go and do something with their time that would fill a different bucket than is more readily filled by a brand or a client.
Right. So talk to me, if someone is interested, what does that application process look like?
On our website, which is sownforgood.com, there's an application portal. There's an application portal for nonprofits. So even if there's NGO executive directors listening, or board members or programmers for nonprofits, we also have an ongoing nonprofit application for who we're going to select to have this film made for. And we keep a short list of some of the most compelling narratives of nonprofits in a Google Doc. And that we add to that all the time with new ones that come in. So we have this repository of powerful, powerful stories happening all over the globe. And then next to that, we have a filmmaker application where filmmakers can go on and apply and say, you're speaking to my soul. I've been wondering why this doesn't exist. And now I know it does. We created it, and you can apply, and it takes like 15 minutes, and you just tell us a little bit about who you are, show us a link to your work, tell us where you've been, tell us what gear you own, and you submit it. And then we keep track of that as well, of filmmakers who've applied. We have nearly 400 applications from filmmakers from across the globe who have applied, who don't want anything in return other than to use their talent for good. So what I'm slowly building and creating without realizing it is the world's largest network of social good storytellers. Totally. And I'm finding, me and Jevin Dovey, my co-founder who you met, I'm finding ways to bring that community together. So that way it's not just siloed projects of filmmakers who are going out on assignment. But now, even if you don't go on an assignment, you still have access to this group of thoughtful, talented individuals all around the globe who can give feedback on your work that you're doing, or ideas that you have, or, you know, rough cuts that you have going, or thumbnails that you're creating, or inspiration channels where you can add inspo that's been moving you lately and see what's moving other people lately, and just have it be this creative well that you give and you receive from. And so that's what we're building right now.
So cool. So cool. Make sure you check that out. I'll put all the information below. And real quick before we go, I just want to chat on the technical side. Your stuff is so good, like both emotionally, but then also like visually on the technical side. I was just curious, your process, like, do you write out the story beforehand? Are you doing it in real time? I was just curious on what your process looks like.
The easiest way I would break it down is that I think in acts. So 3 acts are the traditional structure. Act 1, I always figure out what's the most effective way to establish the problem that we're talking about. This is in the context of NGOs or even brands oftentimes like this structure, because most good, compelling products also are solving a problem. How do you talk about the problem in the most compelling, engaging way that pulls you into a main character's story? Then the second act should talk about how do you unpack this problem, and how do you slowly solve this? How are ways that either the product or the organization is solving it? The organization, I should mention, is not the hero of the story. Rule number 1, anytime people set out to do an NGO film, they think, oh, it's a film about the NGO. No, the NGO is more like the mentor of the story. The character is the hero, and the character is someone that they served, someone who benefited from the work that they did and was transformed from before they engaged with organization to after, and who they are today and who they're becoming in the future. So Act 1 is a problem. What was life before the organization? What is the larger issue at hand? Illiteracy, homelessness, refugees trying to find job placement, whatever it is. And then the second act is, how are we dealing with that? And we're still in the world of the main character. How is their life being changed on a tangible level by being a part of the work? And then once you establish the work that's being done and really unpack the guts of what the film is about in the second act, then the third act is, what do we do now? Where do we go from here? Is there something that we still need to do to change the first act? Is there still a statistic that we need to change? Okay, that's my call to action. Give now, help change the lives of 500,000 women in Nepal who can't read or write. Or this work is done, and now here's the vision of what we're doing next. And how do I get a part of that? Or if it's a product, this is how it can change your life. This is how it can impact your life going forward, or change the way that you engage with the world around you. So that's a 3-act structure I think in. And then how I maneuver within those buckets is like an in the moment process for me.
Experience plays so much into that.
Exactly. And so you have that guiding my structural story brain. And then from a cinematography brain, that's training of just harnessing the real life light around you and see what looks good, and know where things will shine and where things will look really cinematic to the camera, always shooting into the light, looking for room with contrast, looking for ways for people to be silhouetted, making sure that you're getting plenty of hero shots of the individuals that you're focusing on, making sure that you're getting emotional range of the characters you're focusing on. If they're talking about how painful their past was, can you find moments where the imagery is darker and more bleak, or where they're looking out over a landscape, kind of reflecting on it, giving them prompts as the filmmaker? I want you to really think right now about one of the, that moment you told me about earlier. Would you just hold that in your mind as you film them, and that now it's emanating out of them? And then making sure that you have the footage to tell the story of the third act. Now everything's better, things are changing. It's, we've solved some of this problem. How is the cinematography lifting? How is some of the action coming alive on screen, so that way the audience can feel like they went from this sort of cave to out into the bright world, to feel like there is hope. We're not stuck in the darkness.
Oh, so good. That's so, I think, practical and tangible ways to think about tackling a story. Because I know at the beginning, it'll feel quite daunting. So again, you guys should replay that and listen to that back, because there was so much good takeaway from a storytelling and filmmaking perspective that Jake shared there. So Jake, thank you so much for coming on, man. I hope we can do some more stuff in the future, and send me some mezcal when you can.
We didn't even get to that on next episode of Frame by Frame, talking all things agave.
Yes, we'll definitely have you back.
All right, man. Thank you for having me. It was awesome unpacking this with you. All right.
If you want to learn more, make sure that you subscribe to my channel. And if you could rate us on the platform you're listening to, that would be a huge help to get the word out. I would really appreciate 5 stars if this conversation was helpful for you. Thank you so much for watching, for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Frame by Frame.